God help your future husband." The cowboy laughed, and he meant it as an insult. Sophia Bennett looked him straight in the eye, mud on her boots, medicine bag in her hand, and said without blinking, "God will bless you." Andrew Collins had survived blizzards, bankruptcy, and grief. He had never once been caught off guard by a woman. He had no idea that the most dangerous thing to ever set foot on Collins Ranch had just stepped down from a wagon. He had no idea that the most dangerous thing to ever set foot on his ranch had just arrived in a wool coat with mud on her boots. If this story already feels familiar to your heart, stay with us, because what happens next will surprise you. She stepped down from the wagon before the driver had even pulled the horses to a full stop. That was the first thing Andrew Collins noticed about Sophia Bennett. Not her face, not the mud caked on her travel boots, not even the heavy leather medicine bag she carried on her left shoulder like it weighed nothing. He noticed that she did not wait. Most people who came to Collins Ranch waited. They stood at the edge of the property and called out. They took off their hats. They showed the kind of careful deference a person shows when they are approaching something they are not sure is friendly. The woman stepped off the wagon, looked at the house, and walked toward it like she had already been invited inside. Andrew crossed his arms. Beside him, his ranch hand Eli whistled low under his breath. "That the woman from Willow Creek?" Andrew did not answer. He was already watching her too carefully to speak. She was younger than he expected. He had imagined someone older when Mrs. Calloway's letter described a skilled healer who had worked the frontier for 3 years. The woman walking toward him looked 25 at most, with dark hair pinned back under a plain wool hat and eyes that were scanning the property the way a person scans something they are trying to understand quickly, not admiring it, assessing it. That bothered him more than he wanted to admit. "Miss Bennett," he called out when she was close enough. She stopped. "Mr. Collins," she did not smile. She did not extend her hand. She looked at him the way a woman looks at a problem she has already begun solving. "Your cattle are losing weight." Andrew blinked. "I know that," he said. "That's why I sent for. I saw 2 of them near the road. Their ribs are showing more than they should for this time of year." She shifted the bag on her shoulder. "How long has the water source on the north pasture been running low?" A beat of silence passed between them. Eli took a quiet step back. Andrew felt something sharp move through his chest. It was not anger exactly. It was closer to the feeling of being caught off guard by something you were not prepared for. "We'll talk about the cattle later," he said, keeping his voice level. "Right now I'd like to know if you understand what kind of work this ranch requires." "I do." She met his eyes without flinching. "Do you understand what kind of help you're asking for?" The air between them went very still. Andrew Collins had lived 35 years on this earth. He had broken horses, survived 2 brutal winters, buried a man he called a brother, and built one of the most productive ranches in all of Colorado Territory. He was not a man who was easily caught off balance. But he could not immediately think of how to answer that question. He covered it with the only thing that came naturally in that moment. He laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It was the laugh of a man who does not know what else to do with something that has surprised him, so he turns it into something small. "Miss Bennett," he said, "God help your future husband." He expected embarrassment. He expected her to look away. Every woman he had ever said something cutting to had looked away first. Sophia Bennett did not look away. "God will bless him," she said simply. Not defensively, not sharply. She said it the way a person states a fact they are completely certain of. Then she looked past him at the house. "Now, are you going to show me where the sick cattle are? Or would you like to keep testing me first? Because I've been traveling since before sunup, and I've had worse conversations than this one. So I'm prepared either way." Eli made a sound behind him that might have been a laugh, very quickly disguised as a cough. Andrew stared at her for another long moment. Then he uncrossed his arms. "This way," he said, and walked toward the barn. And he did not look back to see if she followed, because something told him she already was. The town of Willow Creek had been telling jokes about Sophia Bennett since she was 19 years old. The jokes always started the same way. Someone would mention marriage, or courting, or what kind of woman made a good wife for a hard-working man, and eventually somebody would shake their head and bring up Sophia. "Lord help whoever ends up with that one," they would say. "She'll argue with a fence post and expect the fence post to apologize. Good heart on her. Shame about the mouth." Sophia had heard every version of those comments. She had heard them from men who meant them as warnings. She had heard them from women who meant them as sympathy. She had long since stopped explaining herself. What the people of Willow Creek called stubbornness was something Sophia understood differently. She had grown up the oldest of 5 children in a family that had very little and needed very much. Her father was a decent man worn thin by debt and hard harvests. Her mother was a woman who had learned to make every small thing stretch far enough to cover what they needed. There was no room in that household for weakness or waiting. If something needed doing, Sophia did it. If something was wrong, Sophia said so. Those were not character flaws. Those were the tools she had built to survive. When she was 17, a traveling doctor had passed through their county during a fever season. He stayed 3 weeks. Sophia followed him to every house call she could, asking questions, watching his hands, memorizing everything. When he left, he told her she had a gift. She had been working as a healer ever since. Not formally. The territory did not license women as healers, but families on the frontier did not always have the luxury of formal. They needed someone who would come in a snowstorm, someone who would not charge more than they could pay, someone who would sit with a sick child through the night without being asked to. Sophia was that person. She had delivered babies in situations that would have undone a stronger person. She had saved cattle that veteran ranchers had written off. She had stitched wounds in firelight and diagnosed sickness by nothing more than the smell of a man's breath and the color of his eyes. None of that made her easier to love, apparently. She was still the woman God would need to help your future husband survive. She had stopped being hurt by it. Mostly. There were still moments, quiet ones. Usually at the end of a long day when she was tired enough that her guard slipped when those words settled somewhere underneath her ribs and stayed there like a stone. She thought about them when she packed her bag for Collins Ranch. A woman named Mrs. Eliza Calloway had written the letter. She ran the supply store in Willow Creek and knew everything about everyone within 50 miles. The letter said that Andrew Collins's cattle had been declining for 2 months, and that Andrew himself was too proud to ask for help through the usual channels. So she was asking on his behalf without his knowledge. That last part made Sophia pause. She had heard about Andrew Collins the same way she had heard about most prominent men in the territory. He was spoken of with the particular mixture of respect and wariness that people reserve for someone who is genuinely capable but also genuinely difficult. A good rancher. A hard man. One who had come out to Colorado Territory 10 years ago from somewhere east and built something real with his own hands. He had also, according to the story Willow Creek told, never recovered from something. Nobody said exactly what. People in that territory were particular about a man's private grief, but the shape of the story was familiar enough. A loss. Something that had closed a door inside him and left him managing the outside of his life with great competence, while the inside stayed dark. Sophia had seen that before. She recognized it in the set of Andrew Collins's jaw when he laughed at her. Not the laugh of a man who found her genuinely amusing. The laugh of a man who uses humor as distance. She had filed that information away and said nothing about it. The barn was large and well built. That was the first thing she noticed. Whatever Andrew Collins's struggles, he had not let them touch his craftsmanship. Everything was solid, constructed with the kind of careful attention that speaks to a man who believes deeply in the value of things done correctly. 4 cattle were separated in the far stalls. Even from the entrance, Sophia could see the problem. She was already moving toward them before Andrew finished speaking. They started losing weight 2 months ago, he said from behind her. I changed their feed. Brought in a man from the next county to look at them. He said it was probably just the winter. It's not the winter. Sophia crouched beside the nearest animal and ran her hands along its side, checking the ribs, the hip bones, the texture of its coat. When did you last test the water in the north pasture? We don't. Andrew stopped. We use the creek. The creek runs through old Harlan Briggs's property before it reaches yours. It has for 20 years. Did Briggs do any mining work on his land in the fall? Silence. Sophia looked up. Andrew's expression had changed. The careful blankness he had been wearing since she arrived had slipped just enough to show something underneath it. He mentioned something about trying his luck last summer, Andrew said slowly. Said he'd found traces of silver. Didn't come to anything mining runoff, Sophia straightened. Small amounts. Not enough to kill them outright, but enough to weaken them over time. They're absorbing it through the water. That's why the feed change didn't help. The problem isn't what they're eating. It's what they're drinking. Andrew stared at her. She watched him process it. Watched the moment when something he had been unable to solve for 2 months became suddenly, clearly solvable. It was one of her favorite moments in this work, the moment when a problem stopped being a weight and became a task. "You're certain," he said. "Not entirely. I need to test the water properly to be certain. But I'm certain enough that you should stop letting them drink from that creek today." She picked up her bag. "Do you have another water source on the property?" "There's a spring on the south pasture." "Good. Move them there tonight." Andrew did not move immediately. He was still looking at her with that expression, the one that had replaced the laughing. It was harder to read than the laughing had been. It was the expression of a man recalculating something. "Who taught you to think like that?" he asked. It was not what she had expected him to say. "Experience," she said. "And a doctor named Whitfield who was kind enough to let a 17-year-old girl follow him around for 3 weeks. You were 17? I was very determined." Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. Something quieter than that. "I believe it," he said. That night, Sophia ate dinner in the ranch kitchen with Andrew, Eli, and 2 other ranch hands named Carl and Thomas. The kitchen was warm and smelled of wood smoke and coffee. It was a functional space, built for feeding working men, not for comfort. But there was a window above the basin that looked out toward the mountains, and the last of the evening light was still clinging to the peaks when they sat down. Eli talked enough for several people. Carl ate with focused efficiency. Thomas was young, barely 20, and kept glancing at Sophia with the particular uncertainty of a person who had been told something about a woman that is not matching up with the actual woman in front of him. Andrew said almost nothing. He ate, he listened, he refilled his coffee once, and at least 4 times Sophia caught him looking at her with an expression she could not quite name. "So you think you can fix the herd?" Eli said, not unkindly, between bites. "I think redirecting their water source will help considerably," Sophia said. "If there's underlying damage from the contamination, that's a longer process. But most of them looked strong enough. They should recover. And if they don't, then we'll look at what else might be contributing to it. There's usually more than one cause." Eli nodded slowly. "The last man Collins brought in said there wasn't anything to be done. Told him to cull the weaker ones." Sophia looked at Andrew. Andrew's jaw had tightened very slightly. "I didn't cull them," he said. And there was something in his voice that was not quite defensiveness and not quite explanation. Something closer to a decision stated out loud. "I know." She held his gaze for a moment. That was the right call. He looked at her for a beat too long. Then he looked back at his plate. Eli was watching both of them with the expression of a man who is carefully not smiling. The argument came on the 3rd morning. Sophia had been up before dawn to check on the relocated cattle and to begin the water testing. By the time Andrew found her, she had already been working for 2 hours and had found what she was looking for. "The contamination is real," she told him, showing him the small test vials she had brought in her bag. "The South Spring is clean. This will take time, but the cattle should start improving within a few weeks if we keep them away from the creek." Andrew looked at the vials. He looked at the south pasture fence line. He looked at Sophia. "I need to speak to Harlan Briggs." "You do," she agreed, calmly if possible. He may not have known what the runoff was doing downstream. He knew, Andrew said, and his voice was flat in a way that told her there was more history there than she had been given. She did not push it. Then she made the mistake, or what Andrew decided was a mistake. She walked out to the south pasture fence, crouched down, and began measuring the spacing between the lower rails. Andrew was behind her before she heard him. "What are you doing?" "The lower rail spacing is wrong," she said without turning around. "A calf got through here last week, didn't it? I heard Thomas mention it last night. That's not your concern." She stood up and turned. He was closer than she expected, and the expression on his face was not the careful blankness from the first day. It was something harder. "You came here for the cattle," he said. "Not to redesign my fencing. I came here to help." She held his gaze. "The calf that got out last week, what happened to it?" A pause. "We found it the next morning, in one piece." Another pause. "Longer, mostly," he said. "Then the fence is part of what I'm here for," she said quietly, "whether you want to see it that way or not." Andrew stared at her. His hands were at his sides, and his jaw was working slightly. The way a man's jaw works when he is deciding between two different things he could say. Bennett. His voice came out low and careful, like something he was measuring. I have run this ranch for 10 years. I know. I have handled every problem that has come at it. I know that too. I don't need someone coming onto my land and telling me what I've been doing wrong. Sophia took a breath. She understood this moment. She had been in it before, not with him, but with men like him. Men who had built something they were proud of, who had survived things that cost them, and who experienced help as an accusation. I'm not telling you what you've been doing wrong, she said. I'm telling you what can be better. There's a difference. His jaw tightened. Not much of one. A very large one, actually. She kept her voice even. Everything wrong that I've seen on this ranch is the kind of wrong that happens when one person carries everything alone for too long. That's not a character flaw, Mr. Collins. That's just too much weight for any one set of shoulders. The silence that followed was different from the silences before it. Andrew Collins was not looking at her with the careful blankness anymore, and he was not looking at her with the rigid pride from a moment ago. He was looking at her like someone who has just heard something move behind a closed door they had forgotten was there. He turned away before she could see whatever came next on his face. Fix the fence, he said. But you ask Eli for the supplies. My men have enough to do. He walked back toward the house. Sophia watched him go. Something had shifted. She could feel it the way she could feel a change in weather not visible yet, but present in the air. She was not sure if that was going to make things easier or harder. She suspected it was going to make things more honest. That her experience was always harder first. By the end of the first week, Sophia had learned several things about Andrew Collins. He rose earlier than anyone on the ranch. He was always the last to go to sleep. He never ate breakfast, only coffee, which partly explained a short-temperedness that was not entirely about pride. He checked on the cattle twice a day, always alone. He spoke to his horses differently than he spoke to his men. Not softly exactly, but with a particular patience that he did not extend to the rest of the world. He kept a photograph on the mantelpiece in the main room. A family portrait. 2 adults and a young boy, formal and stiff in the way of photographs that cost money to take. The boy looked like him. The adults looked like people who knew how to work. He never mentioned it. None of the men did either. Sophia did not ask. But she noticed that he never walked through the main room if he could go around it. He took the long way through the kitchen to reach the front door. Every time that way too. On the 7th day, something happened that she had not expected. She had been testing the water again and had gone further up the creek toward Briggs's property line than she had before. She was crouched at the bank, working carefully, when she heard a sound that did not belong. A dog, she thought first. Then she looked up. It was a wolf. Not large as wolves went, but 40 feet maybe less, standing at the tree line above the bank, watching her with yellow eyes. Sophia did not scream. She had encountered wolves before, and she knew that screaming was one of the worst options. She stayed still and held its gaze and breathed as normally as she could manage, which was not very normally. She heard the shot before she processed what it meant. The wolf startled and vanished back into the trees. She spun around. Andrew stood on the bank above her, rifle lowered, expression unreadable. "Are you hurt?" he said. No, her voice came out steadier than she felt. "You didn't have to shoot, I didn't hit it." Warning shot. He came down the bank in 3 long strides. "What are you doing this far up the creek testing?" She held up the vials, which she was mildly proud she had not dropped. "I wanted to find where the contamination begins, to give you a clearer picture for when you talk to Briggs." He was standing very close now, close enough that she could see his breathing was not entirely steady either. "You were testing water samples 30 feet from a wolf." "I didn't know about the wolf when I started, obviously." A muscle moved in his jaw. "You should have told someone where you were going. I'm used to working alone." "That's not a virtue, Miss Bennett. That's a habit that is going to get you killed." His voice was sharper than it had been before, and underneath the sharpness was something that surprised her. "On this ranch, you tell someone where you're going. Every time." "That's not a request." She stared at him. He held her gaze without flinching, but his hands, she noticed his hands were not entirely still. "All right," she said quietly. Something in him seemed to release slightly. "The water test," he said after a moment, looking at the vials. "What did you find?" "The contamination starts about 60 yards north of here. right at the edge of Briggs's property. She showed him the samples. This gives you something solid to bring to him. He can't argue with water chemistry. Andrew studied the vials for a long moment. Then he looked up at her. You tested the water and made a map of the property line? The map is rough. Eli can draw you a better one. You made a map, he repeated. It wasn't difficult. That's not why I'm saying it. His voice had changed again. Quieter now. He was looking at her with that expression from the first dinner, the one she had been unable to name. You went further up the creek. You did more than you were asked. And you did it to give me something I could actually use. Sophia was quiet for a moment. That's what the work requires, she said finally. Most people don't do what the work requires unless you push them. He paused. You've been here a week and I have not had to push you once. She did not know what to do with that. So she did what she always did when something caught her off guard. She looked at the practical thing in front of her. We should head back, she said, the light's going. Andrew nodded. He did not move immediately, though. He stood there one more moment, looking at her with that quiet, unnameable expression. Then he walked up the bank first and waited at the top for her to follow. She noticed that too. The letter arrived on the 8th day. It came with the supply wagon from town, addressed to Sophia in handwriting she recognized. Her sister Clara's handwriting. Clara, who was 22 and married and very happy about it, and who wrote Sophia letters that alternated between genuine affection and the gentle, persistent implication that Sophia was running out of time to find what Clara had found. Sophia read it in the kitchen, while the stove was still warm from breakfast. Clara had heard she was at Collins' ranch. Everyone knows about Andrew Collins. Sophia. He's terribly handsome, they say, and terribly difficult. You should be careful not to get attached. You know how you get. Sophia folded the letter neatly and put it in her coat pocket. She did not know how she got, exactly. What Clara meant was that Sophia cared about things too completely. She went too far into the problems of other people. She stayed too long. She invested in situations that could not invest back in her. The letter was not wrong. It had happened before. She had spent 8 months caring for a ranching family 3 counties over after their oldest son was badly injured. She had practically run their household, while the wife recovered from her own illness. She had done it because they needed her, and because the work was genuine, and because she believed in finishing what she started. When she left, the husband had shaken her hand and said, "You're a good woman, Miss Bennett. Some man's going to be very lucky." He had meant it kindly, it had not felt kind. Sophia stood up, put the letter deeper into her pocket, and went to check on the cattle. Andrew was already there. He had a bad habit, or rather she had started thinking of it that way, of being wherever the work was before she got there. It should have been admirable. It mostly was admirable. It also meant she kept finding herself standing next to him in spaces that were not quite large enough for the kind of careful distance she had been trying to maintain. "How are they?" she asked. "Better." His voice was different in the mornings. Quieter, less defended. "The one in the second stall is eating properly for the first time all week." She moved to check for herself. He was right. The animal's eyes were clearer. Its stance was better. "Another 2 weeks," she said, "and they should be close to normal. You'll be gone before 2 weeks." It was said flatly, without visible emotion. "I can come back," she said. Equally flat, he looked at her. "You'd come back, if you need me to. The work isn't finished in one trip." Another silence. He was looking at the cattle, not at her, but his hands had gone very still on the rail. "Most people don't come back," he said. She waited. He did not explain further, but he did not need to. She had heard it the way you hear something said between the actual words. "I'm not most people," she said quietly. He looked at her then. It lasted 3 seconds at most. It was not a long look, but it was the kind of look that a person remembers, because it is the kind of look that a person gives when they are trying to decide whether they are allowed to believe something. Then he looked away and said, "Let's check the south pasture fence," and she followed him, and neither of them said anything else, and the morning went on around them. She tried not to think about Clara's letter, and she mostly failed because the morning went on around them, quiet and unremarkable, and Andrew Collins walked beside her through the south pasture without saying a single unnecessary word, and somehow that silence said more than Clara's entire letter had. Sophia had been around men who filled silence with noise because they were uncomfortable in it. Andrew was not uncomfortable. He moved through quiet the way he moved through work deliberately, without waste, as if he had made a decision long ago about what deserved his energy and what did not. That was either the most admirable thing she had ever encountered in a person, or the loneliest. She had not decided which. The fence repair took the better part of the morning. Sophia held the rails while Eli hammered, and Thomas fetched supplies, and Andrew directed everything with the economy of a man who had done this so many times that the instructions had worn grooves into the air itself. At one point, Andrew took the hammer from Eli without comment, and finished a section that was not going in straight, his movements sure and unhurried. Eli caught Sophia watching. He did not say anything. He just smiled at his boots and went to fetch more nails. By the time they finished, Sophia's arms ached pleasantly and the sun had moved well past mid-morning. "You should eat something," Andrew said, not looking at her. He was coiling rope with practiced efficiency. "You missed breakfast." "I had coffee, that's not eating." "You never eat breakfast." He went very still for exactly 1 second. Then he kept coiling the rope. "That's different," he said. How, he did not answer, but the tips of his ears had gone slightly red, which was the most satisfying thing Sophia had witnessed all week, and she walked back to the house, feeling considerably better about the morning. The meeting with Harlan Briggs happened on the 10th day. Andrew did not tell Sophia he was going. She found out because Thomas mentioned it at breakfast with the casual assumption that she already knew, and she did not correct him. She spent the morning working on a written summary of her water test findings, clear, precise, the kind of document that could be shown to a county official if it came to that. And when Andrew came back in the early afternoon, she was sitting at the kitchen table with the summary in front of her. He stopped in the doorway. She looked up. His jaw was tight. His hat was in his hand. He had the look of a man who had kept himself controlled through something that had required significant effort to control. "How did it go?" she asked. "About as well as you'd expect a man to take being told he's been poisoning his neighbor's cattle." "Did he know?" Andrew set his hat on the hook by the door. He came to the table and stood on the other side of it, looking down at the papers she had spread out. "He said he didn't." "Do you believe him?" A pause. "I believe he didn't care either way." His voice was carefully flat. "There's a difference." Sophia looked at him for a moment. Then she slid the written summary across the table toward him. "This is documented," she said. "Every test, every result, the location markers. If he doesn't agree to reroute the mining runoff by spring, you have grounds to take it to the county office." Andrew picked up the summary. He read it in silence. She watched his eyes move across the page with the focused attention he gave to everything, and she waited. When he set it down, he looked at her differently than he had before. Not the unreadable expression, not the careful blankness. Something more direct. "You wrote this for me," he said. "I wrote it for the cattle. You wrote it so that I would have something to stand on if Briggs decided to be difficult." He tapped the edge of the paper. "You thought 3 steps ahead. It's what the situation required. You keep saying that." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. It was the first time he had voluntarily sat at the same table with her, without the buffer of Eli or the other men. That things are what the situation requires. Like you don't get credit for going beyond what anyone asked you to do. Sophia was quiet for a moment. "Credit isn't really." "Don't tell me credit isn't what you're after," he said. "I know that. I'm saying you don't let yourself receive it, even when someone is trying to give it to you." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, she could hear Eli hammering something in the distance. The sound of the ranch going on around them, ordinary and constant. "You're perceptive for someone who claims not to need anyone," she said finally. Something moved across his face. It was not quite a smile, but it was the shape where a smile might eventually live. "Eli talks," Andrew said simply. "Eli talks constantly, that you're the most competent person who has ever set foot on this property." "And what have you told him?" Andrew held her gaze. "I told him to mind his business," he said. "That's not a denial." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." That night the temperature dropped sharply. Sophia woke at 2 in the morning to a sound she recognized before she was fully conscious the particular pitch of distressed cattle. She was dressed and out the door before she had time to think about it. Andrew was already at the barn. Of course he was. He turned when he heard her come in, and his expression was not surprised. It was something closer to resigned, like a man who has stopped being able to predict what this woman will do and has decided to simply account for her. "The heifer in stall 3, he said. "She's early. Sophia moved to the stall without being asked. The animal inside was young, too young, really, for this. And she was struggling in the way that SEDS had been going on for longer than just tonight. How long? Sophia asked. Eli heard her about an hour ago. I've been here since. She rolled up her sleeves. I need more light and hot water. He was already moving to get both before she finished the sentence. What followed was 2 hours that Sophia would not remember clearly afterward, because the kind of focus that kind of work requires leaves very little room for observation. She was aware of Andrew beside her, handing her things before she asked, anticipating needs she did not have to voice, moving with a steadiness that she found herself relying on in a way she had not expected. He was not in her way. That was rarer than it sounded. Most people who tried to help in moments like that were in the way. Andrew Collins seemed to understand instinctively where to be and where not to be, when to hold something and when to step back, when to speak, and when silence was more useful. At 3:47 in the morning, the calf came into the world with the particular drama of a thing that has been fought for. Sophia sat back on her heels and let out a long breath. Andrew crouched beside her. They were both exhausted, both covered in evidence of what the last 2 hours had been. The barn was warm and smelled of animals and effort, and the strange, specific relief that comes after a crisis passes. Good work, he said. It was 2 words. Quiet and direct and entirely without embellishment. Sophia had received formal thank yous and elaborate praise and public acknowledgement from people whose opinions mattered to everyone around her. Those 2 words hit differently. She was glad the light was dim. She'll need watching for the next 24 hours, Sophia said, keeping her voice professional. The calf, too. They're both all right. But early arrivals can surprise you. I'll stay with them, I can, Sophia. His voice was quiet. It was the first time he had used her given name. She did not think he realized he had done it. Go sleep. I'll stay. She looked at him. He was looking at the heifer with the same patient attention he gave to everything on this ranch, and his expression in that moment, unguarded, tired, quietly devoted to this animal who needed him, was not the face of the man who had laughed at her in the snow on the first day. Call me if anything changes, she said. I will. She walked back to the house in the cold dark and lay down on her bed without changing her clothes and was asleep in 4 minutes. She dreamed about nothing that she could remember. In the morning, both the heifer and calf were fine. Andrew, however, was not fine. He had not slept. He was at the breakfast table when Sophia came down, and he was on his 3rd cup of coffee, and there were the particular shadows under his eyes that came from a full night of no sleep rather than interrupted sleep. Eli took one look at both of them and made a large batch of eggs without being asked. Sophia sat down across from Andrew. He looked up. They're well, he said immediately, because he understood that was what she needed to know first. You should sleep this morning. I have work. Your work will go poorly if you're running on 3 cups of coffee and stubbornness. She kept her voice even. The cattle can survive until noon without you personally supervising them. Andrew looked at her for a long moment. You sound like someone who has had this argument before, he said. I have it with myself approximately twice a week. Something real moved across his face then. Not the shape where a smile might live. The actual smile. Small and brief and genuine, gone almost before she could be sure of it. But there, it made her stomach do something she immediately decided not to examine. I'll sleep when the morning round is done, he said. It was a compromise. She recognized it as one. She accepted it. Fine. I'll do the morning round with you so it goes faster. Eli, at the stove, made no sound whatsoever. He was working very hard at being invisible. You don't, Andrew started. I know I don't need to. She picked up her coffee. That's not why I'm doing it. The morning round did go faster with 2 people. They worked side by side through the north barn, the south pasture, the new water source check, the feed distribution. Andrew knew this land the way Sophia knew anatomy, not consciously, but in the body below the level of thought. He moved through it with an ease that was actually beautiful to watch once you stopped being irritated by his particular brand of stubbornness and started paying attention to the competence underneath it. He also, she realized, talked more when they were working. Not excessively. Not the way Eli talked. But the work seemed to loosen something in him. He told her things in motion that he would not have said at a table. He told her that the north barn had been rebuilt 3 years ago after a fire. He told her that the spring on the south pasture had been the only reliable water source when he first bought the land, and that finding it had felt like the first thing that had gone right in a very long time. He said that last part without looking at her, his eyes on the fence line, his voice even, like a man who had not intended to say quite that much and was not going to make a production of having said it. Sophia did not make a production of it either. "When did you come out here?" she asked. "Originally." "From where?" "Ohio." A pause. "I had family there." Past tense. She noticed it the way she noticed everything, quietly and without comment. "What brought you to Colorado?" He was quiet for a moment. They were walking along the south fence line, and the morning light was doing something useful and warm across the fields. And somewhere above them a hawk was making slow circles. "The distance," he said finally. She understood that, too. There was a particular kind of wound that heals better in a new place. Not because the place changes anything, but because the new place has no memory of what you were before. You can be whoever you manage to build, without the weight of being compared to the person you used to be. Ohio to Colorado is considerable distance, she said. It needed to be. She let it rest there. She did not ask what had made him need that much. The photograph on the mantelpiece was in the back of her mind, patient and unexplained. He would tell her or he would not. That was his to decide. They finished the south pasture fence check and started back toward the house. The morning was almost done. "You grew up in the territory?" he asked. "Kansas originally. We came to Colorado when I was 14. Big move for a family. My father began trying the next thing." She smiled, not unhappily. "Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. But we always had something to try. That's a good way to raise children." "He was a good man," she paused. "He died 4 years ago." Andrew was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry." "Thank you." She meant it simply the way she meant most things. He would have liked this ranch. He appreciated things that were built to last. Andrew looked out at the land around them, his land. 10 years of his life pressed into every acre of it. "It's the only thing I know how to do," he said quietly. "Build something and keep it standing." It was perhaps the most honest thing he had said to her since she arrived. She looked at him sideways. "You're better at it than you think you are," she said. He glanced at her. "You've known me 10 days. I'm a fast reader." She kept her voice light, but she meant it. "Eli trusts you completely. Thomas would walk off a cliff if you told him it was necessary. The cattle are healthy enough to recover even after 2 months of contamination, which means someone has been compensating for the problem even without knowing exactly what it was. That doesn't happen without a person who genuinely cares." She paused. "You care about everything on this ranch. You just won't let anyone see it." Andrew stopped walking. She stopped, too, a half step later, and turned to look at him. His expression was very still. The way a thing goes still when something has hit it exactly where it did not expect. "Eli definitely talks too much," he said at last, his voice low. "Eli didn't tell me any of that," Sophia said. "I paid attention." The space between them felt different than it had any morning before. Neither of them moved. Then Eli's voice cut across the distance from the barn. "Collins, you've got a visitor." Andrew looked away first. He turned toward the barn, and Sophia let out a breath she had not realized she was holding, and the moment dissolved into the ordinary business of the morning, the way moments do when they are not quite ready to be faced directly. The visitor was Margaret Holt. Sophia did not know her, but she understood her immediately. Margaret Holt was perhaps 40, handsome in the careful way of a woman who had always known she was handsome and had built accordingly. She was dressed better than the occasion of a ranch visit required, in a deep blue traveling coat that had not come from any store in Willow Creek. She stood in the yard with the particular posture of a woman who is accustomed to arriving somewhere and having that arrival be noted. It was noted. She looked at Andrew with the warm familiarity of long acquaintance. She looked at Sophia with considerably less warmth. "Andrew," her voice was measured and pleasant, "I heard you'd brought someone out from Willow Creek. I thought I'd come see for myself how things were going." "Things are going well," Andrew said. His voice had shifted. Not cold, but careful. The way a man sounds when he is managing something. "Margaret, this is Miss Sophia Bennett. She's helping with the herd. How lovely." Margaret's smile did not quite reach her eyes. "I didn't know you'd sent for a woman. Mrs. Calloway arranged it." "Of course she did." Margaret looked at Sophia with an expression that was perfectly polite and communicated several things that had nothing to do with politeness. What a capable arrangement. Sophia smiled the way she smiled at things that were not actually funny. Sophia, Andrew said, and again her given name. Deliberate this time. She thought, Margaret Holt has the property 2 miles east. She's been a neighbor since I first settled. A good neighbor, I hope, Sophia said pleasantly. I've tried to be. Margaret's attention slid back to Andrew with the ease of a woman returning to territory she considered hers. I wanted to make sure you were all right after the winter. And after all the trouble with the herd. You never came to me for help, I managed. You always say that. Something in Margaret's voice softened into what might have been genuine feeling, and that was perhaps more dangerous than the polite sharpness. Andrew, you don't always have to manage alone. The silence that followed was a complicated one. Sophia recognized that she was standing in the middle of something that predated her by years. She could see the shape of it, the long-established concern, the unanswered question, the patient waiting of a woman who had been waiting long enough to have become certain it was worth it. She also saw, in the careful neutrality Andrew was maintaining, that he was not going to resolve any of it in this moment. I'll go check on the heifer, Sophia said. She said it simply and cleanly, without performance, and walked to the barn without waiting for a response. Inside, she found the heifer and calf exactly as she had left them, quiet, recovering, needing nothing from her at the moment. She stood there anyway. She checked things that did not need checking. She gave the situation outside time to be whatever it needed to be. She told herself she was not bothered. She was a little bothered. Not because of Andrew, she had no claim on Andrew Collins. No right to be bothered by a neighbor who had known him for 10 years. But because of the thing Margaret had said. You don't always have to manage alone. It was the right thing to say. Sophia knew that because she had said versions of the same thing herself, in different words, over the past 10 days. The difference was that Margaret said it with the confidence of someone who expected it to eventually work. Sophia was not sure she had that confidence. She was still standing in the barn, thinking about things she had decided not to examine when Andrew appeared in the doorway. She looked up. She's gone, he said. You didn't have to come tell me. I know. He came into the barn and stopped a few feet away, looking at the heifer. Margaret means well, I'm sure she does. He stopped, reconsidered. She's a good woman. She's been kind to me. But she has an idea of what she thinks this place needs, and it doesn't always match what the place actually needs. Sophia looked at him carefully. And what does it actually need? The question landed more quietly than she intended. Andrew looked at her. The barn was warm. The calf was making small, contented sounds in the straw. Outside, the ordinary work of the ranch was going on. I'm still figuring that out, Andrew said. It was not a declaration. It was barely even an admission. But it was honest, and with Andrew Collins, she was beginning to understand that honesty was its own form of extraordinary. Let me know when you do, she said. He held her gaze for one long moment. Then he turned back to the heifer and began the quiet work of checking her over. And Sophia stood beside him and did the same. And the barn held them both in its warm, undemanding silence. The letter came 3 days later. Not from Clara this time. From Willow Creek. From 3 separate people. As it turned out, Mrs. Calloway, the minister's wife, and a woman named Ruth, who ran the boarding house where Sophia had been staying when she was not at Collins Ranch. All 3 letters said essentially the same thing in different words. People were talking. A young woman alone on a ranch with a man. No chaperone. No formal arrangement. The work was one thing. Healers worked in all kinds of conditions. Everyone understood that but 11 days was a long time. And people were starting to say things. They were saying, in particular, that Sophia Bennett was not there just for the cattle. Ruth's letter was the most direct. I say nothing against you, dear, but you know how things look. And you know how things look matters in this territory, whether it should or not. Sophia sat with all 3 letters for a long time. She knew how things looked. She had always known how things looked. Things had been looking various ways at her for her entire adult life, and she had generally decided that the work mattered more than the appearance, and kept going. But this was different. This was Andrew's reputation as much as hers. He had not asked for this. He had asked for help with his cattle. She went to find him. He was in the main room, the one he avoided going over account books at the desk near the window. He looked up when she came in. and he saw immediately that something was wrong, because he set down his pen before she said a word. She put the letters on the desk. He read them, all three. His expression did not change while he read. It was the careful blankness, but she had known him long enough now to know that the blankness itself was information. It meant he was managing something. It meant something was hitting close. "I'll leave tomorrow," Sophia said. "The herd is stable enough. I can write up full instructions for the remaining weeks of their recovery. You don't need me here physically for is that what you want?" His voice was very quiet. She stopped. "It's not about what I want," she said carefully. "It's about what's right for Sophia. Just her name. Nothing else." She closed her mouth. He stood up from the desk. He was taller than the room seemed to account for sometimes. Broad-shouldered and tired around the eyes, and more present than anyone she had been near in a long time. "I'm not asking you to leave," he said. "Andrew, I have not asked for your opinion of what Willow Creek thinks of me in 10 years. His voice was still quiet, but there was steel underneath it. "I am not going to start now. It's not your reputation I'm worried about. It's mine." He looked at her. "Your reputation," he said slowly, "should reflect what you actually are, not what people imagine from a distance." "That's a fine principle," she said. "It doesn't change what they're saying." "Then let me change it." He picked up the 3 letters, stacked them neatly, and set them face down. "I'll send word to Mrs. Calloway. We'll make the arrangement formal. Documented contract, fair payment, full accounting of your work here. Nobody can say anything about a documented professional engagement." Sophia stared at him. "You'd do that?" "I should have done it from the start." Something moved through his expression, not quite guilt, but close enough to the shape of it. "I didn't think about how it would look for you. That was careless of me." She had not expected him to put it that way. She had expected defense. She had expected the pride she had seen in him from the first day, the careful wall. She had not expected him to look at his own oversight and name it plainly. "It would have helped," she said quietly. "At the start, I know." He held her gaze. "I'm sorry for that, Sophia." And there it was again, her name. Not Miss Bennett. Not the careful professional distance of the first week. She looked at him for a long moment. "The contract makes sense," she said finally. "But I want the terms to be clear. I'm here for the cattle. That's the work." "That's the work," he agreed. "And when the cattle are recovered." "You go." He said it evenly. "If that's what you choose, if." She noticed that word. She was nearly certain he had noticed it too. "I'll stay through the recovery," she said. Something in his chest seemed to settle. "Good," he said. "Just that." She picked up her own letters from the desk and walked back toward the kitchen. She was almost at the door when he spoke again. "Sophia," she turned. He was standing where she had left him, and the afternoon light was coming through the window behind him, and his expression was the open one, the one she had seen in the barn in the early morning hours. "Unguarded," he said, "for staying." She held his gaze for 1 beat. 2, 3. "Thank you for asking me to," she said. And then she walked out of the main room and into the kitchen and stood at the window and watched the mountains do the slow, unhurried thing they did every afternoon, the light changing across the peaks. The world going on and on and on, outside this small life that was quietly becoming larger than she had expected when she stepped off a wagon in the snow 11 days ago. She did not look at the letters again. She started writing the telegram to Mrs. Calloway instead, and by the time she finished it, the kitchen had gone dark around her, and someone, Andrew, she realized, because it was always Andrew, had come in without a word and lit the lamp on the table beside her without being asked. That was the thing about him she kept failing to prepare for. Not the difficult parts. The difficult parts she had expected. The pride, the stubbornness, the wall he kept between himself and anything that asked too much, those she had catalogued and accounted for on the first day. What she had not accounted for was the other thing, the quiet competence of his caring. The way he noticed what people needed before they said it, and provided it without ceremony, as if the only point of paying attention was to be useful. She had known people who were kind as a performance. Andrew Collins was kind the way he built fences, because something needed holding together, and he was the one who knew how. She finished the telegram. She folded it. She did not look up. "Thank you," she said, "for the lamp. Kitchen gets dark fast this time of year," he said from behind her. Then his footsteps moved away, back toward the main room, and she heard the familiar sounds of him settling into the evening's accounts. Sophia sat there in the lamplight for a long time before she went to bed. She did not examine what she was feeling. She was becoming quite skilled at that. The telegram to Mrs. Calloway was answered within 2 days, which was fast for Willow Creek. The formal contract arrived on the 4th day, already signed on the town's end, with a note from Mrs. Calloway in her precise small handwriting. "I knew it would work out, dear. I always know these things." Sophia was fairly certain Mrs. Calloway had known considerably more than she had put in the original letter, and had arranged considerably more than a simple healer's call. She filed that suspicion away without acting on it, signed the contract, and handed it to Andrew. He signed it at the kitchen table without reading it first. She stared at him. "You should read it," she said. "I trust it's fair. You shouldn't sign things you haven't read. I trust you." He set the pen down and looked at her with the directness that still caught her off guard sometimes. "That's different from trusting a document." Sophia took the signed contract back and did not say anything else, because there was nothing to say to that, at least not out loud. By the end of the 3rd week, Collins Ranch had settled into something she had not expected. A rhythm. Not the careful rhythm of a healer and a client. Something closer, looser, and more honestly functional. She woke in the mornings and knew what the day needed before she had to ask. Andrew woke earlier and had already started the first round by the time she arrived, and he would give her a brief account of what he had found, and she would tell him what she thought should happen next, and they would divide the work without negotiation, as if they had been doing it for years instead of weeks. The cattle were recovering, visibly, measurably, week by week. Eli had taken to referring to them collectively as we when discussing ranch decisions, which Sophia noticed but did not comment on, because it was accurate, and because correcting it would have required acknowledging something she was not yet ready to name. Thomas had stopped looking at her with uncertainty. Now he looked at her with the straightforward admiration of a 20-year-old who has decided someone is the best person he has ever encountered, which was simultaneously touching and slightly exhausting. Carl remained efficient, quiet, opinionated only about food, and apparently perfectly content to be in the presence of any competent person without requiring further information about them. And Andrew. Andrew was Andrew, which was a category that kept expanding in ways she had not predicted. He had started asking her things. Not about the cattle, about other things. About what she thought of a particular decision regarding the North Pasture rotation. About whether she believed the county would take action on the Briggs situation if he pushed it formally. About what kind of winter Kansas had compared to Colorado, and whether she had ever felt like a place belonged to her the way some people seemed to belong to places. That last one he asked on a Thursday evening when they were both sitting on the porch after supper, the kind of sitting that had started happening, without either of them deciding it should, and the sky was doing something ambitious with color, and she had been quiet long enough that he must have thought it was a safe question to ask. "Kansas never felt like mine," she said. "It felt like my father's. Colorado feels possible. Like it hasn't made up its mind about me yet." "That might be the most honest description of this territory I've ever heard," he said. "What about Ohio?" Longer than his usual pauses. "Ohio felt like something I was supposed to stay inside of," he said. "This feels like something I built." She nodded. She waited. He did not say more. But that was more than he had said about Ohio before, and she understood it was offered in proportion to what she had offered, and that this was how trust worked between two people who had both learned to be careful with it. She let the evening go on around them without pushing anything further. The first real blow came on a Tuesday. Sophia had been out to the North Pasture for a water check. She told Andrew she was going, as she always did now, and when she came back through the yard, there was a wagon she did not recognize. 2 men stood beside it, speaking with Andrew. The conversation had the stiffness of something that was not friendly. She slowed. Andrew's back was to her, but she could read his posture from 30 feet away. Shoulders set, weight slightly forward. The stillness of a man who is keeping himself from reacting. One of the men noticed her first. He was older, heavy through the middle, wearing the kind of suit that looked wrong in ranch country, too clean, too deliberate. He looked at her the way certain men looked at women who were somewhere they had decided women did not belong. "That the healer?" he asked Andrew, loudly enough that she could hear clearly. "Miss Bennett works here," Andrew said. "Works here?" The man's voice carried a particular texture, the texture of a word being repeated to communicate skepticism about all the words around it. Thought you said you brought her out for the cattle. I did. Seems like she stayed a while for cattle work. Andrew did not answer that. The second man was younger, quieter, and had the look of someone who was there to observe rather than lead. He glanced between Sophia and Andrew with the neutral attention of a person taking inventory. Sophia walked toward the group at the same pace she had been walking. Not slower, not faster. Miss Bennett, Andrew said when she was close enough. His voice was careful and clear. This is Gerald Marsh. He has a property north of here. And James Pryor from the county office. Sophia nodded at both of them. Gerald Marsh did not nod back. We've had some concerns, Marsh said, redirecting his attention to Andrew with the deliberate quality of a man who has decided the woman does not factor into this conversation. About kind of concerns. Andrew's voice was level. The kind that come up when a man starts running his operation differently than he has for 10 years. Marsh's gaze moved briefly, pointedly to Sophia and back. Different influences. The ranch's operation is my business. Up to a point. When a man starts changing water sourcing, redirecting his herd, renegotiating with neighboring properties, Marsh paused. People notice. People are welcome to notice, Andrew said. They're not welcome on my land without an invitation. Jim's here from the county office. Jim can state his business directly. James Pryor cleared his throat with the expression of a man who had not entirely wanted to be here and is now even less enthusiastic about it. There's been a formal query, Pryor said carefully, from Mr. Briggs, regarding your claim that contamination from his property has affected your herd. It's not a claim, Sophia said. It's documented. Both men looked at her. She had spoken without raising her voice. She held Marsh's gaze without flinching. The water tests are written up with sample locations, dates and chemical results, she continued. The contamination point traces to within 40 yards of the Briggs property line. I have the original samples if the county office wants to run its own tests. Pryor looked at her for a moment. Something shifted in his expression, not warmth, but the particular respect a man gives when he encounters competence he had not expected. That would actually be useful, Pryor said. She looked at Andrew. He gave her the smallest nod. She went to get the samples. Behind her, she heard Marsh say something in a lower voice. She could not make out all of it. She caught enough. Woman running things not how a ranch ought to work, people are saying. She kept walking. She heard Andrew's voice, still level, still controlled. You're welcome to come back with documentation of your own concerns, Gerald. Until then, I'll ask you to keep my name out of whatever conversation you're having about how a ranch ought to work. She did not turn around, but she stood in the barn for a moment longer than she needed to, with the sample cases in her hands, letting the steadiness come back into her breathing. She had known something like this would come. She had known it from the moment she read the letters from Willow Creek. The territory had an opinion about her, and it had had that opinion for years, and it was not going to revise it easily just because she had done good work. What she had not entirely predicted was that hearing it said out loud, hearing the shape of Marsh's dismissal would cost something. She went back out. Pryor took the samples with professional efficiency and gave her a receipt. Marsh had retreated to a careful distance and examining the fence line with the expression of a man who has run out of things to object to directly and is looking for alternative ammunition. When the wagon pulled away, Andrew stood in the yard watching it go. Sophia stood beside him. He'll make trouble, she said. Marsh always makes trouble. It's his primary contribution to this county. He knows people in the county office. He knows people everywhere. Andrew turned to look at her. His expression was a controlled thing. She could see the work of keeping it that way. He's been trying to buy the east quarter of my land for 3 years. I've said no 3 times. She understood then what the visit had actually been about. The contamination claim gives him leverage, she said. If he can muddy it enough, make it look like the documentation is compromised. His jaw tightened very slightly. Make it look like the person who produced the documentation has reasons that aren't purely professional. There it was. She had said nothing about Clara's letter or Ruth's letter or what Willow Creek was saying about the length of her stay. She had signed a contract and kept her head down and done excellent work and trusted that good work was its own argument. Gerald Marsh was about to make that argument more complicated. I should go into town, she said. Andrew looked looked at her sharply. That's not permanently. She kept her voice steady. But I should go in, be seen, talk to people. Let Willow Creek see that I'm the same person they've always known. It's harder to build a story around someone when they're standing right in front of you. Andrew was quiet for a moment. You shouldn't have to do that, he said. I know. She met his eyes. But I'm good at doing things I shouldn't have to do. I've had a lot of practice. He looked at her with that expression, the open one. The unguarded one, and something in it, was different from the other times. Sharper, closer to the surface. I don't want you to go to town because some man with bad intentions decided to make your work look like something it isn't, he said. And his voice had dropped into the register. It only reached when he had stopped managing what came out of it. He stopped. She waited. I want things to be simpler than they are, he said finally. She understood exactly what that meant. She understood it in her chest. Precisely. The way you understand something that has also been true of you for a very long time. They never are, though, she said gently. No. He looked at the road where the wagon had gone. They never are. She went to Willow Creek the next morning. Andrew drove the wagon himself, which she had not asked him to do. He said he had business at the supply store. She did not press him on whether that was true. Willow Creek on a Wednesday morning was the particular version of itself that meant people were going about their business but paying careful attention to each other while appearing not to. She felt eyes on her the moment they came down the main street. Mrs. Calloway was behind her counter when Sophia came in, and her expression shifted through three things, in quick succession: surprise, assessment, and then a particular shrewd satisfaction that told Sophia she had expected something like this. Sophia. She came around the counter and took her hands. How are things at Collins Ranch? The herd is recovering well, Sophia said. I wanted to come in and pick up a few things, and talk to some people, Mrs. Calloway's eyes were very bright. Of course you did. She managed the rest of it in the way she managed most things directly, without performance and without apology. She spoke to the minister's wife and was pleasant and informative about the cattle situation. She stopped at Ruth's boarding house and had coffee and spoke plainly about the professional engagement and the contract. She bought supplies at 3 different shops and spoke to whoever was available at each one about nothing in particular, which was its own kind of statement. She did not see Margaret Holt. She was not sure whether she was relieved or not. She was at the hardware store when she heard the conversation that changed everything. She had gone to the back to find a particular kind of bracket that Eli had requested, and she was in the narrow aisle between the shelving when 2 men came in the front and stopped near the counter, close enough that she could hear them clearly. One of them was Gerald Marsh. Collins has lost his head, Marsh said, not quietly. He was the kind of man who did not feel the need to be quiet. 10 years he ran that place solid. Now some woman from nowhere shows up and suddenly he's changing water sources, picking fights with Briggs, and God knows what else. His herd's improving, though, the other man said. He sounded uncertain. This time, Marsh's voice shifted. Question is what it costs him long term. Woman like that, you've heard what people say about her. Can't keep a situation from getting complicated. Had 3 separate families in this county run her off after she stayed too long and got too involved. Sophia went very still. She had not heard that one before. It was specific enough to sound like it could be true. It was vague enough that she could not immediately refute it. That was the particular architecture of a lie that had been designed carefully. She had not been run off by 3 families. She had left each situation when the work was done, or when her presence was no longer the right kind of help. Those were facts. But facts required an audience willing to consider them, and audiences in this territory were not always willing. She came out from the aisle before she had fully decided to. Both men turned. Marsh's expression did not change, which was its own kind of answer. He had known she might be there. He had said it anyway. Miss Bennett, he said, with the pleasantness of a man who has already won a game the other person doesn't know they're playing. Mr. Marsh. She looked at him steadily. I couldn't help hearing what you said. This is a public establishment, it is. She set the bracket she was holding on the counter and looked at him directly. I'd like to know which 3 families you're referring to, because I'd like to write to them and ask their account of it. A beat of silence. I heard it from various sources, Marsh said. Specific sources with specific names, or the kind of sources that are actually nobody in particular. Her voice was even and clear. Because in my experience, those are two different things. Marsh looked at her with the expression of a man recalibrating. He had expected embarrassment, she thought. He had expected her to go quiet or go red or go away. I don't think this is the place he started. You made it the place, she said simply. I'm not angry, Mr. Marsh. I'm asking you a direct question. If what you said is true, you should be able to tell me the names. He could not. She already knew he could not. She watched him understand that she knew. The bracket, she said to the man behind the counter, who had been watching all of this with wide eyes. I'll take it. Please, she paid. She walked out. Her hands were not entirely steady, but they were close enough. Andrew was waiting at the wagon. He looked at her face and knew immediately that something had happened. Tell me, he said. She told him. All of it. The aisle. Marcia's words, the confrontation, the lie about the three families. She told it plainly, the way she reported water test results, because she had found over the years that the plainest telling of a hard thing was the one that left the fewest places for it to fester. When she finished, Andrew was very still. She had seen him still before. This was different. This was the stillness of something that had come to a decision. He was in the hardware store, Andrew said. Yes. He knew you were in there, I think so. He said it anyway. His voice had gone to the flat place. The place underneath the careful management. He wanted you to hear it. Yes. She paused. Andrew, get in the wagon. She looked at him. Please, he added, and it was the addition of the please that told her this was not dismissal. This was something else. She got in. He drove straight to the county office. James Pryor was at his desk when they arrived, and Andrew Collins walked in and put his own documented account of Harlan Briggs' contamination on the desk alongside Sophia's water test results, and a third document that Sophia had not seen before a formal complaint, about Gerald Marsh's interference in the Briggs matter, with 3 signatures from neighboring ranchers who had experienced similar pressure from Marsh over the previous 2 years. He had been preparing this. He had gathered those signatures before today. He had known this day was going to come, or something like it, and he had quietly prepared for it without telling her. Pryor looked at the documents. He looked at Andrew. He looked at Sophia. This is a significant filing, Pryor said. I'm aware. Andrew's voice was even. I'd like it entered into the county record today. Pryor looked at the documents again for a long moment. Then he reached for his stamp. On the wagon ride back, Sophia sat beside Andrew and the road went on ahead of them, and neither of them spoke for a while. You had those signatures ready, she said finally. For 2 weeks. You didn't tell me. I didn't want you to feel like you needed to manage it. He kept his eyes on the road. It was mine to manage. She looked at his profile. The jaw. The set of his shoulders. The man who had laughed at her in the snow less than a month ago and had been quietly, systematically building a defense of her and her work ever since. He glanced at her. Why? She asked. Not accusingly. Genuinely. He looked at the road for a long moment. Because you came here to help, he said. Because you helped. Because the people in that town have been saying wrong things about you for long enough that someone should start saying right ones. He paused. And because I am capable of doing what is right, even when it takes me a while to get there. Sophia looked at him for so long that he glanced at her again. What, he said. Nothings. She stopped. Started again. I'm not used to that. To someone doing it for me. The wagon went on. The road was dusty, and the afternoon was cooling, and somewhere to the west, the mountains were keeping their steady, unchanging watch over all of it. Andrew said nothing for a moment. Then, get used to it. Quiet and direct. Exactly like good work in the barn in the early hours of the morning, when the calf came into the world and she had almost believed in things she had stopped letting herself believe in. She looked at the road. She said nothing. She was fairly certain her face said enough. The storm came 4 days later. It came fast and mean, the way the worst ones did not building gradually but arriving, as if it had been waiting somewhere just out of sight, and had decided without warning that now was the time. By the time anyone realized what they were dealing with, the wind had already taken a section of the north barn roof, and the rain was coming in at an angle that made no sense until you understood that the wind was doing something no wind had any business doing. All 4 ranch hands were in it immediately. Sophia was in it with them. There was no discussion about this. There was not time for discussion. Andrew pointed and people moved, and Sophia was one of the people who moved. They lost part of the fence on the east pasture before they could reinforce it. That meant cattle moving, and cattle moving meant finding them. And finding them in a storm like this meant going in directions that were not comfortable. Thomas went down in the mud and turned his ankle, not broken, but bad. So I got to him fast, assessed it, wrapped it tight, and sent him to the barn with Carl while she took his section of the fence repair. She was hammering a stake into the ground when the section of it gave out entirely. It just went. The post snapped at the base and the whole thing came down, and she lost her footing and hit the ground on her side and lay there for a moment, while the rain came in at its impossible angle and the world sorted itself back into the right order. Andrew was there before she had fully processed that she was on the ground. "Are you hurt?" His hands were on her shoulders, her face, her arms not frantic, but fast and thorough in the way of a person who needs information quickly. "I'm fine," she pushed herself up. "I slipped. I know. We need Sophia." His hands cupped her face and she stopped moving. He was close enough that she could see his expression clearly even in the rain, and his expression had none of the careful blankness in it. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said, truthfully this time. He looked at her for one more second. His thumbs were against her jaw, and rain was running down both their faces, and the storm was loud, and the fence was down, and none of that seemed particularly important in this exact moment. Then he let go and pulled her to her feet in one movement and said, "The posts are in the south storage," and moved toward them. And she followed, and they fixed the fence in the rain with the kind of shared efficiency that had become their particular language. But her face still held the memory of his hands. She suspected it would for a while. They were at the kitchen table at midnight when Eli came in and sat down without being asked, which was how she knew what he was about to say was not going to be easy. "I was in town yesterday," Eli said. Andrew looked up from his coffee. "People are talking," Eli said. "About the storm, about Sophia being in it, about what that means." "What does it mean?" Andrew asked. His voice was very quiet. "They're saying you've lost your grip on things. That letting a woman work a storm crew is." Eli stopped, looked at Sophia with the expression of a man delivering news he disagrees with. "They're saying Collins Ranch isn't being run right." "By whom?" "Marsh is leading it. But it's spreading." Eli's jaw worked. "There are men on the county board who are saying a formal review of your operation might be warranted." Sophia's hands went still around her cup. A formal review meant men with authority coming onto this land and assessing everything Andrew had built. It meant the contamination dispute being reframed as a symptom of mismanagement. It meant Marsh getting exactly what he wanted, without having to buy a single acre. "That's what this was always about," she said. Both men looked at her. "Marsh doesn't care about me," she said. "He never did. I was the easiest thing to point at. But what he wants is the land. A formal review, a bad one, gives him grounds to move on it." She paused. "Andrew, how much do you owe on the east quarter?" His jaw tightened. "I'm not asking to pry, I'm asking because it matters." A silence. "Then 3 years left on the note." 3 years, she turned that over. "If the bank gets nervous, the bank already has questions." His voice was flat. "The note officer came out last month." She stared at him. "You didn't tell me." "It wasn't Andrew." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "We are solving problems on this ranch together. That is what is happening here. You cannot tell me the fence measurements and not tell me the bank is asking questions." He looked at her across the table. The lamp was between them. Eli had gone very quiet. "It didn't feel like your weight to carry," Andrew said. "Nothing about this was my weight to carry at the beginning," she said. "I chose to carry it anyway. Don't take that choice away from me because you've decided what I can handle." The kitchen held that for a moment. Eli stood up, poured himself more coffee, and sat back down with the expression of a man who is staying exactly where he is and daring anyone to suggest otherwise. Andrew looked at the table, then at her. "The bank officer wants a formal account of the herd recovery," he said. "Documentation of the contamination issue and its resolution. Evidence of stable operation." "I can write that," Sophia said immediately. "Everything is documented. The test results, the cattle weight records, the water source change, the projected recovery timeline, all of it." She paused. "It's a strong case, Andrew. The herd is recovering. The contamination issue has a county filing behind it. If the documentation is presented correctly, the bank has no grounds for concern." "You can write that," he said, and it was not quite a question. I can write it so clearly that a man who has never set foot on this ranch will understand exactly what happened here and why the operation is sound. She held his gaze. That's what I do. I solve the problem in front of me. Andrew was looking at her with the open expression again, but it was more open than she had ever seen it. It was the expression of a man who has kept a door shut for a very long time, and someone has just demonstrated, without trying to, exactly why the door should open. Marsh is going to push the board before the end of the month, Eli said. We don't have long. Then we start tomorrow, Sophia said. She looked at Andrew, he looked at her. Tomorrow, he agreed. And the storm outside was finally quieting, and the ranch was still standing, and the three of them sat at the kitchen table in the lamplight, while the night moved toward morning, and something that had been building for weeks came quietly, firmly, and irrevocably to a point where it could no longer be ignored. And something that had been building for weeks came quietly, firmly, and irrevocably to a point where it could no longer be ignored, so they started the next morning. Before the sun had fully decided to rise, Sophia at the kitchen table with every document she had produced since arriving at Collins Ranch, spread out in front of her, and a fresh sheet of paper ready for the report that was going to determine whether everything Andrew had built for 10 years stayed standing or fell. She worked the way she always worked when something mattered. Methodically, without hurry and without waste. The water test results first, dated and cross-referenced with the location markers. Then the cattle weight records she had been keeping since the second day numbers. Andrew had not asked her to track, but that she had tracked anyway, because she never entered a situation without accounting for it fully. Then the timeline of the water source change, the projected recovery arc, the actual recovery results compared against the projection. The actual results were better than the projection. She had not told Andrew that yet. She had been waiting until she was certain. She was certain now. She wrote it into the report with the particular satisfaction of a person who has done the harder thing correctly and can now show the proof. Andrew came in at 5:30 and stopped behind her chair and read over her shoulder without speaking. She did not startle. She had become accustomed to him appearing in the spaces around her work. It had stopped feeling like intrusion weeks ago. It felt, if she was honest with herself, like the opposite of intrusion, like the specific comfort of a person who fits into your working space without disrupting it. The weight gain in the second week, he said. I didn't realize how significant it was. 22% above my initial projection. She turned to show him the column. The South Spring water is cleaner than I expected. It's actually benefiting the herd beyond just removing the contamination. He leaned over her shoulder to look at the numbers, and he was close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, and she kept her eyes on the page with focused deliberateness. This is the document that saves the East Quarter, he said quietly. This is the document that shows the truth of what's been happening here, she said. The East Quarter saves itself. It's been sound all along. He was quiet for a moment. You always do that, he said. She looked up at him. He was still close, still reading the page, and his voice had the morning quality, unguarded and direct. Do what? She asked. Give the credit to the thing instead of to the person who understood the thing. She did not have a quick answer for that. She turned back to the paper and picked up her pen. I'll have the full report ready by afternoon, she said. He straightened. She heard him pour coffee. She heard him pull out the chair across from her and sit down. Then I'll stay, he said, until it's done. He was not offering to help. He was not hovering. He was simply staying. Being present in the way he had learned to be present over the last weeks, occupying the room without demanding anything from it. Sophia wrote. Andrew drank coffee and went over his accounts. The morning came in through the window. The ranch woke up around them. She thought, I have never worked well with another person in the room before. She thought, this is new. She did not write either of those things on the page. The report was finished by early afternoon. 12 pages. Clear, thorough, precise enough for a county bank officer, and plain enough that an ordinary man could follow the argument from first line to last without losing the thread. Andrew read every word of it. He read it the way he read the water test summary that first time fully, without skimming, with the focused attention he gave to things he intended to understand completely. When he finished, he set it down and looked at her. This is extraordinary, he said. It's accurate, she said. Sophia. His voice had that tone. The one that meant he was not going to let her redirect this. This is the best case I've ever seen made for anything. In writing on paper by anyone. He paused. Where did you learn to do this? I taught myself. When I started working with families who needed help advocating for themselves with doctors or officials or landlords, I realized that knowing the right thing wasn't enough. You had to be able to prove it in a language the other person accepted. She paused. So I learned the language. He was looking at her with something that had moved past the open expression into something she did not have a word for yet. You are not what I expected, he said. You said that before. I keep having reasons to say it. He looked at the report again. I'll take this to the bank tomorrow. And I'll send a copy to Pryor at the county office before Marsh has a chance to get there first. Send it today, she said. Hand-delivered. Today, he agreed immediately. He looked up, their eyes met across the table. A beat passed. Andrew, she said. About the board meeting, I'll handle the board. I know you will, but I'd like to be there, he went still. You don't have to be, he said carefully. They will say things. About you. I would prefer you didn't have to. I've been hearing things said about me since I was 19 years old. Her voice was gentle but firm. If this is about my work, I should be in the room. He looked at her for a long, quiet moment. It will be uncomfortable, he said. Most things worth doing are. Something moved across his face. Not the smile exactly. Something deeper and steadier than a smile. All right, he said. Then you'll be there. Eli took the report copies into town that afternoon, and Sophia spent the remaining hours preparing for what came next. She was good at preparing for what came next. It was one of her core competencies, and also, she had long suspected, one of the things that made people call her difficult. People who were always ready for the next thing made other people feel perpetually behind. What she was not prepared for was Margaret Holt arriving at 4 o'clock. She heard the horse first, then voices outside Margaret's pleasant, carrying voice and Thomas's uncertain response, and by the time she went to the door, Margaret was already crossing the yard with the particular purpose of a woman who has decided to have a conversation and is not going to let geography stop her. She saw Sophia in the doorway and stopped. For a moment. Both women simply looked at each other. Miss Bennett, Margaret said. Perfectly polite. Carrying everything underneath it. Mrs. Holt. Sophia stepped back from the door. Andrew is in the barn. I actually came to speak with you. Margaret came inside and stopped in the kitchen, looking around with the eyes of a woman assessing a space she has thought about. I'll only take a few minutes. Sophia closed the door. They stood in the kitchen. Her kitchen, she thought, and then caught herself thinking it and filed that away for later examination. I've known Andrew Collins for 9 years, Margaret said. She said it without preamble, without social scaffolding, in the direct way of a woman who has decided to stop being careful. I've watched him close himself off until there was almost nothing left to reach. Sophia said nothing. I've tried. Margaret's voice was even. I want you to know that. I've tried in every way I knew how. A pause. I thought eventually he would see what was in front of him. Margaret, I'm not here to make you feel guilty, Margaret said. I'm past that. She looked at Sophia directly. I came because I wanted to see for myself what kind of woman does what you've done in 6 weeks. Sophia held her gaze, and Sophia asked. Margaret was quiet for a moment. You're not what I imagined, she said. I imagined someone calculating, someone who saw an opportunity. A small pause. You're just competent and honest, and completely unaware of how you look at him. Sophia felt something move through her chest. She kept her face still. Mrs. Holt, he looks at you differently than he has ever looked at anything in the 9 years I've known him, Margaret said quietly, including this land. She picked up her gloves from the table where she had set them. I wanted you to know that I see it, and that I'm not going to be something that stands in the way of it. Sophia was not entirely sure she was breathing. That's generous of you, she managed. It's practical, Margaret said, with a ghost of something that might have been humor. I've always been practical. She moved toward the door. Take care of him, Miss Bennett. He's a harder man to care for than he looks. And he looks quite hard already. I know, Sophia said. Margaret stopped at the door, looked back. Yes, she said. I think you do. Then she left. Sophia stood in the kitchen for a long moment. She was still standing there when Andrew came in from the barn, boots muddy from the post-storm cleanup, and stopped when he saw her face. What happened? He said immediately. Margaret came. His expression shifted through several things quickly. What did she? Sophia said. She was generous. She paused. She said goodbye. Andrew was very still. He looked at the door Margaret had walked through. His jaw moved. Something passed across his face that had the texture of old grief, not fresh pain, but the settled ache of a thing that has been with you long enough that you have made peace with its shape. She deserved better, he said, than what I could give her. She knows that, Sophia said gently. I think she knew that for a while. He looked at Sophia. She's right that there's something I haven't said. His voice was careful. Something I should say. Her heart was something she was choosing not to name. Andrew, not now, he said. Not today. There's too much still. I want to handle the board. The bank, the East Quarter. I want to have something to stand on before I say it. She understood. She understood it perfectly, because she was built the same way, the need to have the ground solid before you put your weight on a new thing. All right, she said. He held her gaze. But you know, he said quietly. Don't you what I'd say? She looked at him. She knew. She had known for a while. Finish the work first, she said softly. Then say it. The county board meeting was in 3 days. Those 3 days had the particular quality of time that is moving towards something taut, efficient, full of small moments that felt consequential because they were happening inside the awareness that everything was about to be decided. The bank officer came the day after the report was delivered. His name was Mr. Hargrove, and he was a cautious man by profession and temperament, with the expression of someone who preferred all numbers to be smaller than they were. He sat at Andrew's kitchen table and went through the report with Sophia's documented results and the current cattle records, and did not say much for a long time. Andrew sat across from him and was very still in the way he was still when he was keeping himself from reacting. Sophia made coffee. She set it in front of Hargrove without being asked. She sat at the table with the calm of a woman who has done the work and is prepared to stand behind it. Hargrove looked up from the report at her. You produced this documentation? He asked. I did. You're the healer from Willow Creek. I'm a healer who has been working this ranch for the past 6 weeks. Yes, Mrs. Calloway speaks highly of you, Mrs. Calloway speaks highly of most people, Sophia said. I'd be more interested in what the numbers say. Hargrove looked at her for a moment. Then something small shifted in his expression. The numbers, he said, are reassuring. He turned to Andrew. The herd recovery projection is ahead of schedule. The contamination issue has county documentation. The water source change is an improvement over your previous source. He set the report down. I don't see grounds for concern here, Mr. Collins. Andrew's jaw released very slightly. He covered it with his coffee cup. The East Quarter note, Hargrove added. We'll proceed as contracted. Sophia looked at her hands. She felt Andrew look at her across the table. She did not meet his eyes yet. She was not ready for whatever his expression was. Thank you, Mr. Hargrove, Andrew said. His voice was even, controlled. I appreciate your thoroughness. Hargrove left 30 minutes later. Sophia, Andrew said. Don't, she said. Not unkindly. Don't what? Not yet. Wait until after the board meeting. A short silence. You're superstitious, he said. I'm practical, she said, which was what Margaret had said about herself. And she saw the moment Andrew heard that echo, because something softened in his face. Practical, he repeated. It's a useful quality, it is. His voice was very quiet. You're going to have to let me say something eventually. I know. She finally looked at him. Eventually. The night before the board meeting, Sophia could not sleep. This was not unusual for her before something important. She had learned to use the sleeplessness productively. She reviewed. She planned. She found the weak points in her argument before someone else could find them for her. She was at the kitchen table at midnight when she heard movement in the main room. She had learned the sounds of this house completely over 6 weeks. She knew Andrew's particular footsteps and Eli's heavier ones, and Thomas's young man's stride that was always slightly too fast. She knew the sounds the house made when it was settling, and when it was wind, and when it was something that needed attention. She knew it was Andrew. He came into the kitchen and stopped when he saw her. You too, he said. Every time, she said, before something important. He came and sat down across from her. He did not bring coffee. He just sat in the lamplight, in the quiet kitchen, the way they had sat many times before. Tell me something, he said. What? Something real. Not about the board meeting. She looked at him for a moment. I used to think being needed was the same as being wanted, she said. I'd go into a situation, do everything I could. And, when it worked, I told myself that was enough. That the work mattering was the same as me mattering. Andrew was very still. And now he said, "Now I'm not sure anymore." She held his gaze. "I don't know if this is different, or if I'm just telling myself it is because I want it to be." "It's different," he said. His voice was low and certain. "You can't know that." "I know it the same way I knew the South Spring was clean before I tested it," he said. "Some things you can measure, and some things you already know, and the measurement only confirms it." He looked at her steadily. "This is already confirmed for me, Sophia. I've been waiting for you to catch up." She stared at him. "I'm not slow," she said, and the absurdity of that in this context made something break open in her chest. "No," he agreed, and there it was, the real smile. Not the ghost of one, not the shape where one might live, but the actual thing, and it changed his entire face. And she understood why she had been so careful not to look at him directly for the last 3 weeks. She looked at him now. "After the board meeting," she said softly. "After the board meeting," he agreed. "Everything." The county board meeting was held in the main hall of Willow Creek. Sophia had been in that room before. It smelled of pine and dust and the specific formality of a space that was ordinary most days and important occasionally. 7 board members sat at the long table. A dozen townspeople had come to watch, which told her Marsh had been doing his work. She recognized faces from her 3 years in this territory, people she had helped, people she had argued with, people who had made up their mind about her long ago and were not here to revise it. Gerald Marsh was seated in the front row with 2 men she did not know. He looked at her when she came in with Andrew. His expression was the expression of a man who has arranged things carefully and is confident in the arrangement. Sophia took her seat beside Andrew and looked at the board. Pryor was there, in the 3rd seat from the left. He met her eyes briefly. His expression gave her nothing, which she filed as neutral. The board chair, a man named Henderson, opened the meeting. Marsh stood to speak within the first 5 minutes. He was skilled at it. She had to grant him that. He spoke in the careful language of concern, not accusations. Never direct accusations, but implications arranged so precisely that the space between them was full of accusation. He talked about the changes at Collins Ranch, the new water sourcing, the altered operational patterns, the presence of an outside party in decision-making roles. He said the word instability 3 times. He said uncertainty 4 times. He did not say Sophia's name once, which was its own particular method. Andrew sat beside her and did not move. His stillness had a different quality this time, not the managed stillness of keeping himself from reacting. The settled stillness of a man who knows exactly what he is going to do and is simply waiting for the right moment. When Marsh finished, Henderson looked down the table and then at Andrew. "Mr. Collins." Andrew stood. He was not a man who performed. She had known this about him from nearly the beginning. He did not arrange himself for effect. He stood the way he stood at the fence line or at the barn door, solidly, without apology, occupying his own space with the complete conviction of a man who has built something and knows its worth. "I have documentation," he said. He put the report on the table. He put the county filing on the contamination case beside it. He put Pryor's receipt for the official filing on top of that. "The herd at Collins Ranch has recovered 22% above projected timeline," he said. "The water contamination from Harlan Briggs's property has been formally documented and filed with this office. The bank has reviewed our accounts and confirmed the note on the East Quarter is in good standing." He paused. "Collins Ranch is not in crisis. It is operating better than it has in 2 years. The documentation on this table shows why." Marsh's mouth thinned. Henderson picked up the report and began reading. The room was very quiet. Then Marsh stood again. "The question," Marsh said, "isn't the paperwork. The question is who is actually running that ranch and on what authority." Andrew looked at him. "Sophia Bennett," he said, and his voice was clear and carried across the entire room, "came to Collins Ranch as a contracted healer. She diagnosed a contamination problem that had stumped 2 other men before her. She documented it thoroughly enough to file with the county. She produced medical and operational records that satisfied our bank officer yesterday morning." He paused for exactly 1 beat. "If the board would like to explain what kind of authority that requires beyond being competent and thorough, I'm happy to listen," murmuring in the room. Marsh's face had changed. The confidence was still there, but something under it had shifted. "Collins," he started. "I'm not finished." Andrew's voice was even and absolute. Gerald Marsh has attempted to purchase the east quarter of my land 3 times in the past 3 years. I have declined each time. This meeting, this review, this collection of concerns, it did not begin with worry about how my ranch is run. It began when I filed the contamination complaint that cost Marsh a significant portion of his leverage over my property line. He looked at the board. I believe the board is capable of recognizing the difference between a genuine public concern and a private business dispute dressed up to look like one. The room was silent. Pryor, in the third seat, wrote something down without looking up. His mouth had gone very straight, which Sophia was beginning to understand was his expression when he was working to keep something off his face. Henderson set the report down and looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Marsh. "Mr. Marsh," Henderson said, "do you have documentation for the concerns you've raised today?" Marsh's jaw tightened. "The concerns are based on documentation," Henderson said again, pleasantly. A beat of silence. Marsh sat down. Henderson looked at the board. 3 of them were still reading the report, passing it between them. One was looking at the county filing. Pryor was still writing. "I think," Henderson said carefully, "that we can table a formal review pending further cause. The documentation before us suggests Collins Ranch is in satisfactory operation." He looked at Andrew. "Mr. Collins, thank you for your thorough presentation." Andrew nodded once. He sat down. Under the table, Sophia's hand was resting on the bench beside her. She felt Andrew's hand cover it. Not dramatically, not for the room to see. Just his hand over hers, warm and steady, for exactly the duration of the moment when everything that had been threatened was confirmed to still be standing. Then he released her hand, and they both looked forward. She could feel Marsh's gaze from across the room like a pressure. She did not look at him. Outside, the day was doing what Colorado days did, going on without apology, indifferent to what had just happened inside that building. The townspeople came out in clusters. Some of them ignored her. Some of them nodded. Mrs. Calloway found her immediately and took her by both hands and said, "I knew it, dear. I always know these things," with the satisfaction of a woman who had arranged the first move in a game she had been watching play out. Eli was grinning. Thomas looked like he wanted to cheer. Carl looked like Carl. Marsh walked past without looking at either of them. One of the men with him said something in a low voice. Marsh said nothing. He got into his wagon and left. That was, Sophia thought, approximately what a man looked like when he understood he had run out of moves. She did not feel triumphant exactly. She felt the particular clean tiredness of something finished. Andrew was speaking to Pryor a few feet away. She watched him from a small distance. She watched the way he stood, the way he listened, the way he was fully present in a conversation with the same quality of attention he gave to everything. She thought about what he had said in the kitchen last night. "This is already confirmed for me." She thought about 6 weeks. About a wagon in the snow and a laugh she had answered, without flinching, and a heifer born at 4 in the morning, and a man who lit the kitchen lamp and learned to say her name differently, somewhere between the first day and this one. Pryor finished, shook Andrew's hand, and walked away. Andrew turned. He found her immediately, the way he always found her, without looking around first, like he already knew where she was. He walked to her and stopped close, and his eyes asked something without words. "We won," she said. "You won," she said firmly. Something shifted in his face. "The real thing. The full thing. There's something I was going to say after the board meeting," he said. His voice was low. The street was still full of people, and neither of them moved to address that. "I remember," she said. "I'm going to say it now." Her heart did the thing she had been refusing to name for 3 weeks. "Andrew," she said quietly. "Sophia." He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the barn in the rain, with his hands on her face, except that now there was nothing holding him back from it. No storm, no emergency, no careful management. Just this. "Before you came to Collins Ranch, I had a property. I had good land and sound cattle and a house that kept out the cold." He paused. "I had everything a man is supposed to want, and none of the things that make those things worth having." She was very still. "You didn't fix anything on this ranch that I couldn't have fixed eventually," he said. "But you made me want it fixed. You made it matter again. And I don't know how to go back to the way this land felt before you were standing on it." She looked at him. "You're asking me to stay," she said. "I'm asking you to want to," he said. "Those are different questions." She understood that distinction completely. She had always understood it. Staying because you were needed and staying because you chose to, those were the two different lives she had been moving between for years. "I want to," she said. It was simple. It was the truest thing she had said in years. He looked at her for a long moment. "The ranch is yours as much as mine," he said, "if you'll have it." "The ranch," she said carefully. "Or everything," he said quietly, "if you'll have it." The street was full of people and the day was going on around them, and Sophia Bennett, who everyone had spent her entire life warning future husbands about, looked at Andrew Collins and felt something settle in her chest, the way a door settles when it closes on the right thing. "God will bless him," she said softly. The same words from the first day, but they meant something entirely different now. Andrew looked at her. Something moved in his eyes that she had not seen there before. "I believe he already has," he said. And the day went on around them, ordinary and indifferent, while the two most stubborn people in Colorado Territory stood in the middle of Willow Creek's Main Street and understood, without any more words needed, that what came next was not an ending. It was the beginning of the only thing that had always been worth building, and neither of them said another word on that Willow Creek street. Because some things do not need more language than they have already been given, and what had passed between them in those quiet sentences was already complete. They drove back to Collins Ranch in the same wagon they had taken into town, with Eli riding ahead and Thomas and Carl behind, and the afternoon light doing its unhurried work across the territory, and Sophia sat beside Andrew on the bench and did not create any careful distance between them. He noticed. He did not comment on it. He drove with one hand and let the road come at them at its own pace. It was Eli who finally broke the silence from 10 yards ahead, without turning around. "Well," Eli called back, loudly enough to be heard over the horses, "I assume we're celebrating something." "Mind your business," Andrew said. "I take that as a yes," Eli said, still not turning around. And Sophia heard the grin in it. Thomas made a sound of pure young man delight. Even Carl said, "About time," which was possibly the most words he had strung together voluntarily since Sophia arrived. She laughed. It came out of her before she could manage it, which was unusual because she almost always managed herself. It was a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere beneath the rib cage, from the place that only opens when something has genuinely surprised you into happiness. Andrew looked at her when she laughed. She caught him looking. Neither of them looked away. "About time," she agreed quietly. An echo of Carl and Andrew's mouth curved into the real smile, and he faced the road again, and the wagon rolled on through the Colorado afternoon. And Sophia Bennett understood for the first time in her adult life what it felt like to be moving toward something instead of away from it. The weeks that followed had a quality she did not have an existing word for. Not ease, there was too much work for ease. The ranch was in recovery mode, and recovery was not restful. The herd needed continued monitoring. The contamination documentation had triggered a formal county response toward Briggs, and Andrew had to provide additional statements twice. The east quarter fence needed reinforcing before the next hard weather came. The north barn roof repair from the storm was only half finished. None of it was easy, but it had a rightness to it that was new. She and Andrew had developed something she recognized from her work as a healer, but had never applied to her own life, a working trust. The kind that does not require consultation for every small decision, because two people have been paying enough attention to each other that they already know where the lines are. She made calls about the herd without asking. He made decisions about the property without explaining himself first. And at the end of the day, when they sat at the kitchen table and compared what they had done, they found they had been building in the same direction. She told him this one evening. He thought about it for a moment. "My father used to say that a good partnership is when two people solve the same problem from both ends and meet in the middle," he said. "That's exactly it," she said. "He was a practical man." A small pause. "You would have liked him." She waited. He looked at his coffee cup. "He died when I was 23, he said. "My mother the year before. I had a younger brother." Another pause, longer. "Daniel," she held very still. This was the name she had never heard. This was the door the main room held closed. "He was 19, Andrew said. "He came out to Colorado with me. He believed," his voice did something small. "He believed everything I told him about what we were going to build here." "What happened?" she asked gently. "First winter, 76. He turned the coffee cup in his hand. There was a horse. Young animal, not properly broke. Daniel thought he could handle it. He stopped. He couldn't. The kitchen held that for a moment. Sophia did not reach for a platitude. She did not offer the reassurances she had heard people offer to grief because they did not know what else to do with it. She sat with him inside the weight of it, which was the only honest thing. "The photograph in the main room," she said quietly. "That's Daniel." His voice was level again. "The kind of level that costs something. And my parents. That's why you go around the room." He looked at her. "I didn't realize I did that." "You do it every time." He was quiet for a long moment. "It was my fault," he said. "Was it?" "I brought him here. He chose to come," she said. Not to argue, but because it was true. And she believed he deserved the truth, more than he deserved comfort that cost her nothing. His jaw worked. "He was 19, he said. "He would have followed me off a cliff if I'd walked that direction," she said. "Because he loved you. That's not the same as your fault." The silence this time was different from the silences before. It was the silence of something very old being looked at in new light. Not dissolved grief did not dissolve on a kitchen table in a single evening, but something in it had shifted. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, which were not quite so exactly controlled. "I haven't said his name out loud in 4 years," Andrew said. "Daniel," she said simply. He looked at her. His expression, in this moment, was not the open one or the unguarded one or any of the others she had catalogued. It was something she had not seen before. It was the face of a man who has been carrying a weight alone for so long that the first moment someone else touches it, not takes it, just touches it, is almost more than he knows how to receive. "Sophia," he said. Just her name, but it carried the full weight of what he meant. "I know," she said. He reached across the table and took her hand, not the brief touch from the board meeting. This was different. This was deliberate and full, and the hand of a man who has finally decided that holding on is not weakness. She held his hand back. They stayed that way for a while, in the warm kitchen, while the night went on outside, and the ranch was quiet, and Collins Ranch held them both. Clara arrived on a Thursday. Sophia had known her sister was coming because Clara had written ahead 3 letters in quick succession, each one progressively more difficult to contain. Clara had heard things from Willow Creek. Clara had heard things from Mrs. Calloway specifically, which meant Clara had heard everything filtered through the lens of a woman who had been quietly engineering this situation from the start. Clara Bennett was 22, married, frankly happy about it, and incapable of concealing her feelings about anything for longer than 30 seconds. She arrived in a rented wagon with 2 bags and an expression of barely contained anticipation that Sophia recognized from a lifetime of watching her sister be unable to manage surprise. She took one look at Sophia on the porch and said, "You look different." "I look the same," Sophia said. "You don't." Clara came up the steps and took her by the shoulders and examined her with the frank assessment of someone who has known a person's face for their entire life. "You look rested." "No." "You look settled." Sophia felt heat move into her face, which almost never happened. "Come inside," she said. "I'll make coffee." Andrew appeared from the barn at approximately the worst possible moment, which Sophia later suspected was not an accident, because Eli had definitely seen Clara's wagon from the pasture, and Eli had never once in his life failed to provide the universe with information it seemed eager to have. Clara turned when she heard his boots on the yard. She looked at Andrew. She looked at Sophia. She looked at Andrew again. "Oh," Clara said, with the full weight of a woman who has just confirmed every theory she has ever held about a situation. "Oh, I see, Clara," Sophia said. "I'm not saying anything. You're saying everything. I'm not saying a word." Clara extended her hand to Andrew with the bright, direct warmth that was her particular gift. "Mr. Collins. I'm Clara, Sophia's sister. I've heard well. She's told me almost nothing, but Mrs. Calloway is considerably more forthcoming." Andrew shook her hand with the slightly guarded expression of a man being assessed by someone who loves the person he loves. "Miss Clara," he said. "She talks about this place," Clara said. "She thinks I don't notice. But she talks about the ranch, the cattle, the fence repairs." A pause. "Talks about you the way she talks about things that matter." "Clara." Sophia's voice was firm. "I said almost nothing," Clara said cheerfully, and walked past both of them into the kitchen as if she owned it, because Clara had always moved through the world as if she had already been invited in. Andrew looked at Sophia. Sophia started. "Exactly like you," he said. If you had decided to say every single thing you were thinking. Sophia opened her mouth, closed it. That's a terrifying thought, she said finally. The corner of his mouth moved. Come inside, he said, before she reorganizes the kitchen. Clara stayed 4 days. By the second day, she had won Eli over completely, charmed Thomas into moving every heavy thing she pointed at, been declared acceptable by Carl on the grounds that she ate everything on her plate without comment, and established with Andrew a rapport that Sophia watched develop with the particular disorientation of someone seeing two parts of their life meet each other and fit. Clara was direct, Andrew respected direct. Clara was also entirely without pretension, which Andrew, who had been managing pretension from every direction for weeks, found visibly relieving. She asked him plain questions and received plain answers, and treated his silences as information rather than obstacles. On the third evening, Clara pulled Sophia aside while Andrew and Eli were checking on the herd. He watches out for you, Clara said. I know. Not the way people watch out for someone they feel responsible for. The way they watch out for something they can't afford to lose. Sophia looked at her hands. Clara, I'm going to say this once, and then I'll stop. Clara's voice had lost its usual brightness. She sounded like their mother, in the best possible way. You have spent your entire life being the person who takes care of everything and everyone, and then walks away before anyone can decide they don't actually need you. You leave first because it hurts less. She paused. Man is not going to let you do that. Sophia was quiet for a long moment. How do you know? She asked. Because he walked into town and stood up in front of a county board for you, Clara said simply. Men don't do that for women they're going to let walk away. Sophia looked out the window toward the barn. I know, she said softly. Good. Clara patted her hand briskly, the warmth returning to her voice. Then, stop looking like you're waiting for something to go wrong. Sophia looked at her sister. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who knows your face, Clara said. To everyone else, you look completely certain. It's very convincing. Clara left on a Friday morning with 2 jars of preserves that Sophia had made the previous week, and the expression of a woman who will be writing a very detailed letter the moment she gets home. She hugged Sophia for a long time on the porch. Come visit us, she said. Both of you. Clara, just saying. Both of you. Together. Because that's what's happening. She stepped back and looked at Sophia with clear eyes. Isn't it? Sophia held her gaze. She said. Clara's face did the thing it did when she was trying very hard not to cry and succeeding poorly. Good, she said. Good. She climbed up into the wagon and picked up the reins and turned the horse without looking back, because she had always understood when a moment was complete. Andrew stood beside Sophia on the porch as the wagon went down the road. She's extraordinary, he said. She's a force of nature, Sophia said. But yes, she loves you very much. More than I deserve. He looked at her. Do that. What discount what you're worth to the people who choose you? His voice was quiet and certain. You've been doing it your entire life. You can stop. She stared at him. He looked at the road where Clara's wagon had gone. She's right that we should visit, he said. After the spring work is settled. She heard what he had said. We should visit. As a given, as a fact of the future. Not a question about it. After spring, she agreed. He looked at her. There's something else, he said. Her heart moved. There's a minister in Willow Creek, he said. His voice was steady, but she could hear underneath it the particular carefulness of a man who is saying something important and is determined to say it correctly. I've known him for 8 years. He's a good man, quiet. He doesn't involve himself in things that aren't his concern. She waited. I would like to speak to him, Andrew said. If you're willing. The morning was clear and the ranch was waking up around them, and the mountains were doing the faithful thing they always did. And Sophia Bennett looked at Andrew Collins and understood that she had stepped off a wagon in the snow 6 weeks ago, not knowing that she was walking toward the moment she was standing in right now. I'm willing, she said. The conversation with the minister happened 3 days later. His name was Reverend Hale, and he was everything Andrew had described: quiet, plain-spoken, with the settled patience of a man who had watched a great deal of life and had made his peace with most of it. He shook Sophia's hand and looked at her without the assessment she was accustomed to, and then he looked at Andrew with the expression of a man seeing something he had wondered about for a long time finally come clear. Well, he said, it's about time. That seems to be the consensus, Sophia said. Andrew gave her a sideways look. She kept her face straight. Hale asked them 3 questions that mattered, and several that were practical. And by the time they left his office, they had a date set for 3 weeks out, and a man who had promised to keep it quiet until the day itself, because neither of them wanted what they were building to become Willow Creek's entertainment before it had a chance to become real. On the way back to the ranch, Andrew reached across the bench and took her hand. He drove the rest of the way one-handed. She let him. "Are you afraid?" he asked. Somewhere along the road, she thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "Are you terrified?" he said. She looked at him. "Of what?" "Of doing it wrong." His voice was honest in the way it only was in these particular moments, the quiet ones, the ones without witnesses. "I did it once before and I did it wrong. Not the marriage, the closing off afterward. The deciding that the safest thing was to need nothing." He paused. "I know how to do that. I'm afraid of choosing it again without meaning to." She held his hand a little tighter. "I'll tell you," she said, "if you start closing." He looked at her briefly. "You'll tell me," without softening it. "That I believe completely," he said. And there was the smile, the real one, the full one. "You have never once softened anything you thought I needed to hear." "I never saw the point. It's one of the things He stopped. "One of the things I value most about you." She had heard what he had almost said. She did not draw attention to it. She filed it in the place where she kept the things that mattered. The ranch came into view around the bend, solid and enduring and already familiar in the way places only become when they are yours. "It looked different the first time I saw it," she said. "Different how? Like a problem to be solved." She looked at the house, the barns, the pastures, the land. "Now it looks like home," he went very still. Then quietly, "It is." The wedding was on a Saturday in late spring. Willow Creek had found out, because Willow Creek always found out, and the minister's definition of quiet had turned out to mean approximately 12 people knew instead of the entire town, which meant the entire town knew within 4 days. Sophia had decided she did not mind. She had spent enough of her life concerned about what Willow Creek thought of her. She had room now for something different. Mrs. Calloway had of course known before anyone, because Mrs. Calloway had always known, and she arrived on the morning of the wedding with a tin of the best coffee in the territory, and the expression of a woman witnessing the successful completion of a project she was very proud of. "I always know these things," she told Sophia, squeezing her hands. "You arranged the whole thing from the beginning," Sophia said. Mrs. Calloway's eyes sparkled. "I arranged an introduction," she said. "Everything after that was entirely you." Clara was there, having traveled 3 days to be present, with her husband and her inability to remain dry-eyed for longer than 10 minutes, both of which Sophia had expected and loved her for. Eli had brushed his hat for the occasion, which was the frontier equivalent of formal dress. Thomas had combed his hair so severely that he looked slightly unlike himself. Carl wore his best shirt and shook Sophia's hand before the ceremony with the gravity of a man who has decided to participate in sentiment today and will not speak of it afterward. The ceremony was small. The minister and office had been cleared and decorated with the practical simplicity of people who care more about the meaning than the staging. Andrew was standing at the front when she came in, and he turned when he heard her, and his face did the thing she had been watching it do for 7 weeks, the thing where all the management fell away, and what was underneath it was simply him, looking at her the way a man looks at the thing he has decided to spend the rest of his life being grateful for. She walked toward him without hesitation. He held out his hand. She took it. Reverend Hale spoke the words that mattered, and they responded to them simply and without performance, because they were not people who performed. And when it was done and the room was quiet, and everything had been said that needed saying, someone in the back, she thought it was Eli. She was nearly certain it was Eli, said in a low voice not quite low enough, "God help that man." Andrew's hand tightened around hers. He looked at her. She looked at him. And before she could open her mouth, Andrew Collins turned to the room and said, clearly, and without a trace of the careful management he had worn for 10 years, "God already has." Clara cried. Mrs. Calloway pressed her hand over her heart with the satisfaction of a woman who is never wrong about these things. And Sophia, who had heard those words her entire life as a warning, as a joke, as the shape of everything the world thought was wrong, with her heard them now as the only thing they had ever truly been, a prophecy. The months that followed were not perfect. She had never expected perfect. The East Quarter note had 2 more years on it, and the work to meet it was real work. Harlan Briggs settled the contamination complaint and rerouted the mining runoff under pressure from the county. But the process was slow and required Andrew's continued engagement with Pryor's office through the summer. The herd had fully recovered, but a string of hard weeks in July brought its own set of challenges that tested everything they had built. Gerald Marsh sold his property in August and left the county without a word, which the territory took as the admission it was. Margaret Holt sent a gift when she heard about the wedding, a practical one, a good wool blanket, with a note in her careful handwriting that said simply, "Be well, both of you," Sophia wrote back. It was not a long letter, but it was honest, which she thought was what Margaret would prefer. She received a response within 2 weeks. They were not friends. Exactly. But they were something, the respectful acknowledgement of two women who had understood each other's situation and had both behaved with as much dignity as the situation allowed. Clara wrote every 3 weeks without fail. Eli talked constantly and competently and was the person they trusted most with every difficult job on the ranch. Thomas grew into himself that year in the way young men do when they are working alongside people who expect them to be capable faster than you expect, and in directions you did not predict. Carl remained Carl, which was a comfort, and Andrew. Andrew learned slowly and sometimes with effort how to leave doors open. It did not happen all at once. There were evenings when the old habit came back, the careful management, the controlled stillness, the wall that he had built so long ago. It had almost forgotten it was a wall. And on those evenings Sophia would say his name in a particular way, or sit down beside him without explanation, or sometimes simply take the coffee cup out of his hand and replace it with her hand. And he would look at her, and the wall would come down. Not because she pushed it, because she stayed. She had learned that there was a difference, and it was the most important difference she had ever understood. One evening in October, Andrew walked through the main room, directly through it, not around. He stopped in front of the photograph on the mantelpiece and looked at it for a long moment. Sophia was at the kitchen table and could see him through the doorway. She stayed very still. He picked up the photograph. He held it for a while, looking at the stiff, formal image of two parents and a young boy who had believed everything his older brother told him about what they were going to build. Then he set it back down. He turned and walked into the kitchen. He sat across from Sophia. He picked up his coffee. "Daniel would have liked you," he said. She looked at him. The lamp was between them, the same as it had always been, and the ranch was quiet around them, and the mountains outside were doing their patient, permanent thing. "Tell me about him," she said. And Andrew Collins, who had not said his brother's name out loud in 4 years, and had now said it twice, set down his coffee and folded his hands on the table and began to speak. She listened. She would always listen. That was what she had known, in the deepest and most certain part of herself. From the moment she stepped off that wagon in the snow and looked at a man who had laughed at her and had not looked away, that the thing she had to give was not only skill or knowledge or the competence that had defined her entire working life. It was this: the willingness to stay in the room while someone said the true thing. The willingness to hold the weight of another person's life without flinching and without leaving. The capacity to be present, fully and without performance, for as long as it took. Willow Creek had called that difficult. They had said, "God help your future husband." They had said it for years, not understanding that what they were describing was not a burden. They were describing a gift. And Andrew Collins, who had come to Colorado Territory to put distance between himself and everything he had lost, who had built a ranch with his hands and a wall around himself with his grief, and who had laughed at a woman in the snow because he did not know, yet that laughing was the last defense of a man who has run out of others. Andrew Collins knew exactly what he had been given. He knew it the way he knew the sound of the South Spring water, clear and clean and entirely without contamination. The way he knew the weight of good land under his boots. The way he knew his own name said in a voice that meant it fully. Some things you can measure, and some things you already know, and the knowing is its own proof. He had been blessed. Not in spite of Sophia Bennett's stubbornness, her honesty, her refusal to soften what she thought he needed to hear, her complete inability to stay in the lane that people kept drawing for her, because of every single one of those things. And the woman who had spent her life being told she was too much sat in her own kitchen, in her own home on land that was hers as much as anyone's, and listened to the man she loved say the name of the brother he had lost, and understood that this was what she had been built for. Not to be easier, to be enough. She had always been enough. She knew that now. And on Collins Ranch in the Colorado Territory, in the year of 1886, with the mountains keeping their faithful watch, and the cattle healthy in the south pasture, and the lamp burning steady between them, that was the whole and complete and unassailable truth.